Rosa King, it starts on one of those calm summer mornings that makes you feel, deep in your bones, that nothing bad could ever happen. The kind of morning where sunlight drapes itself over the Cambridgeshire fields, slow and golden. Families wander into Hamerton Zoo Park, kids tugging their parents toward the animals, the soft hum of the waking zoo filling the air. And somewhere inside those gates, Rosa King, keeper, caretaker, and friend to nearly every creature who lived there, steps into the enclosure of a tiger she's worked with countless times before. No one expected anything unusual. Rosa certainly didn't. She'd done this all before, always with that mix of confidence and respect that only comes from truly knowing the animals in your care. But then, something changed. Witnesses later said they heard a sound. Maybe it was a sharp cry. Maybe just a shift in the air. The kind you can't quite describe, but you feel it. Suddenly staff members who were normally calm, almost quiet, were shouting, running, urging visitors away. Confusion spread through the crowd, families looking around, unsure why the peaceful morning suddenly felt so heavy. Inside the enclosure, Rosa found herself face to face with Tsar, an Amur tiger. Powerful, breathtaking, unpredictable in the way wild animals always are, no matter how familiar they seem. What exactly happened in those few seconds? No one truly knows. Investigators later said there was no negligence, no wrongdoing, no malice. Just that awful, fragile truth. When you work with wild animals, even with all the care in the world, one moment can change everything. By the time emergency crews reached the enclosure, it wasn't a rescue anymore. It was containment, and though it was a difficult choice, the zoo refused to kill the tiger. A decision everyone close to Rosa believed she would have wanted. She understood these animals. She believed in their right to be exactly what they are, even when that meant danger. News spread quickly. At first it was just a serious incident, but soon the truth emerged. Rosa King, gone. Her colleagues described her as fearless, gentle, and stubbornly devoted. Visitors remembered a bright smile, a keeper who spoke about the animals like they weren't exhibits, but old friends. She lived for this work. The mud, the early mornings, the risk, the wonder. In the days that followed, the zoo closed its gates. Flowers piled up outside. People who had never even met Rosa spoke her name with reverence, because she wasn't just a keeper. She was someone who chose a life most of us admire from behind glass, and she walked into it every day with love, dedication, and a courage she never bragged about. There's no villain here. Just a woman doing the work she loved, and a tiger following instincts older than memory. Rosa's legacy didn't end that day. It lives on in the animals she cared for, in the colleagues she inspired, and in the quiet reminder that even the most beautiful work can carry unimaginable risk. And that sometimes, those who walk closest to the wild give us the greatest lessons in love, respect, and bravery. Maddox Derkosh. There are certain stories that stay with you not because they are recent, but because they're unbearably human. And on a quiet November afternoon in 2012, at the Pittsburgh Zoo, tragedy unfolded so suddenly that witnesses later said they still replay the moment in slow motion. It began like any family trip does. A 2-year-old boy named Maddox Derkosh, bright-eyed, full of restless toddler energy, arrived at the zoo with his mother. The African painted dog exhibit was one of the stops visitors could stand on a wooden viewing deck, looking down into a habitat designed to mimic the wild. Maddox, excited, was lifted up so he could see better. Parents do this 1,000 times without a second thought. But sometimes life shifts in one impossible instant. According to reports and witness statements, Maddox suddenly lurched forward. Some said he bounced. Others thought he might have slipped on the railing. No one agrees on the exact mechanics, only that he fell. A short drop at first, onto a protective net that was supposed to stop anything from reaching the enclosure below. But the net tore. Below him were 11 African painted dogs, fast, muscular, pack-driven predators. Zoo staff reacted immediately. Visitors screamed for help. A keeper rushed in, trying to lure the animals away, but the attack happened too quickly, too brutally, for anyone to intervene in time. Police officers arrived within minutes, but by then the outcome was already devastating. One dog was shot in an attempt to stop the attack. The rest were contained. There were investigations, lawsuits, arguments about safety standards, exhibit design, whether the railings should have been higher, whether netting should have been stronger. The zoo called it a tragic accident. Maddox's family insisted it was preventable. And somewhere between those positions lies the truth, that rare, awful chain of circumstances where a moment of ordinary joy turns into something unthinkable. What remains clearest, even years later, is the human grief that settled over the city. People didn't know what to do with a tragedy like this. There was no villain in the traditional sense, no easy explanation to cling to. Just a child who loved animals, a mother who could never have imagined the danger in a simple lift, and a zoo built on the idea of connection between humans and the wild connection that sometimes, in ways no one anticipates, fractures. Today, the exhibit has been permanently closed. The space stands quiet, reshaped by loss, and Maddox Derkosh is remembered not for the way he died, but for the little boy he was curious, joyful, full of movement, drawn to the world with the kind of wonder most of us lose too soon. Some tragedies fade. This one doesn't. It lingers, heavy, a reminder of how fragile even our safest moments can be. Nordin Montong. There are moments in history when an ordinary day in a zoo, a place usually filled with schoolchildren, families, and laughter, suddenly becomes the stage for something no one could have imagined. And on the afternoon of the 13th of November, 2008, at the Singapore Zoo, a quiet routine broke apart in front of hundreds of stunned onlookers. Nordin Montong wasn't a visitor. He wasn't a stranger. He was a caretaker, a soft-spoken Malaysian worker who spent his days cleaning enclosures and tending to the grounds. Colleagues remembered him as gentle, sometimes withdrawn, but steady in his duties. Nothing that morning hinted at what was coming. Just after noon, people gathered at one of the zoo's main attractions, the white tiger exhibit. Under the heat of the Singapore sun, the tigers lay stretched out near the water, their pale coats glowing like something out of a dream. Cameras clicked. Children pointed. Everything was normal. And then, without warning, Nordin stepped over the railing. At first, a few visitors thought maybe he was staff on duty, part of some demonstration. But the confusion came fast, a wave that moved through the crowd as he descended into the moat. Some witnesses said he walked slowly, al-Muskalim. Others said he looked lost, like he wasn't fully there. Investigators never truly uncovered what was going through his mind. The zoo would later call it a deliberate act, but the deeper reason, that remains unknown. The tigers noticed right away. 3 full-grown white tigers, pure muscle, instinct, and power, began moving toward him. Not running, just that silent, deliberate arc predators make when something catches their attention. Keepers saw it too. Shouts erupted. An alarm blared. Visitors stumbled backward as shock gave way to terror. This wasn't a show. This was a man inside the enclosure with animals built to kill. What happened next was brutally fast. The tigers closed in. Instinct took over. Keepers did everything they could, banging metal, shouting, throwing a fire extinguisher to create a burst of white foam. But 3 adult tigers are not easily distracted. Not when their instincts have already clicked into place. Zoo staff pushed forward with vehicles and loud deterrents, fighting to drive the tigers back. By the time they reached Nordin, he had already suffered fatal injuries. It was a tragedy that left visitors shaken, keepers devastated, and investigators searching for answers that never fully came. A man who spent his days caring for the zoo walked into danger no one could stop in time. And the tigers, doing only what nature shaped them to do, became unwilling players in a moment that scarred everyone who saw it. A moment that reminds us how thin the line is between the world we build and the wildness that still lives just beyond the glass. Alexis Martínez. It happened on a morning that began like so many others on the island of Tenerife. Salt on the breeze, that soft Atlantic light stretching across the rooftops. And inside Laura Park, the low rumble of pumps and water tanks waking up for the day. For the orchid trainers, These quiet early hours were something almost sacred, calm, predictable. A time to rehearse behaviors and share the kind of moments with the whales that the public never gets to see. Alexis Martínez knew this world as deeply as anyone. He'd spent years earning the trust of the park's killer whales, especially Quito, a massive male with presence enough to fill an entire stadium. Other trainers would say Alexis had a steadiness about him. Calm hands, patient voice, no ego, no rush. In a job built on risk, he brought confidence without bravado, a kind of quiet safety. But on December 24th, 2009, Christmas Eve, that sense of safety shattered in a way no one saw coming. The rehearsal that morning wasn't for a show. No music, no crowds, no applause, just a simple sequence of behaviors, run privately as the whales glided through the still water. Quito had done these behaviors countless times before. Trainers watched from the pool's edge. Alexis worked from the water. And everything seemed normal until it wasn't. Something shifted, a hesitation, a misread cue, a break in the rhythm so subtle that people who were there still struggled to describe it. Orcas are intelligent, emotional, unpredictable creatures, even after years of conditioning. And in that brief, fragile moment, the connection between Alexis and Quito slipped out of sync. Then, in seconds, everything changed. Quito rammed Alexis with tremendous force. What happened beneath the water was hidden from view, but the aftermath was unmistakable. When staff managed to pull Alexis from the pool, the injuries were catastrophic, far beyond what anyone expected from an animal. They believed they understood. Despite desperate attempts to save him, he died before paramedics arrived. At first, the park called it an accident, but later investigations revealed a truth that was harder to face. Quito had a history of unpredictable behavior. SeaWorld, who owned him, had flagged him as potentially dangerous. But in the routine of marine parks, warnings sometimes fade into the background of everyday work. Alexis' death sent shockwaves through the industry. And just 2 months later, another tragedy, the death of Don Brancheau in Orlando, forced the entire world to confront questions about captivity and the risks trainers face. But for those who knew Alexis, these wider debates felt distant compared to the immediate grief of losing a colleague. A friend, a man who approached his work with devotion and love. His family remembered him not as a news story, but as someone who felt at home near the ocean. A man who believed in connection, who found meaning in caring for one of the most powerful, complex animals on Earth. The pool where he died still exists, and yet, if you stand there in the quiet hours of the morning, you can almost feel the weight of that day. A reminder that with Orcas creatures as intelligent as they are formidable, the line between partnership and danger is never permanent. It shifts, it breathes, and sometimes, in a single, heartbreaking moment, it disappears entirely. Dawn Brancheau, it was the kind of Florida afternoon that felt almost unreal clear sky, sharp sunlight, and that familiar echo of crowds drifting across SeaWorld Orlando. Trainers moved through the backstage paths like they had 100 times before, preparing for the final dine with Shamu performance of the day. And somewhere behind those gates, Dawn Brancheau was doing exactly what she loved most, caring for the orcas she saw not as performers, but as family. Dawn had dedicated years of her life to these animals. Co-workers said she had a presence you could feel before she even spoke. Calm, meticulous, endlessly patient. She made the impossible look effortless. Standing beside a 6-ton predator with a sense of trust most people could hardly comprehend. But on February 24th, 2010, that trust was tested in the most devastating way imaginable. The show had ended. Guests were still eating at the nearby dining area, watching the pool in that relaxed, between moments kind of way. Dawn remained on the platform with Tilikum, an enormous male orca with a long, complicated history. He had been involved in 2 previous deaths before coming to SeaWorld. Everyone knew his background. Trainers were never allowed to enter the water with him. Every moment with Tilikum required precision. And then everything changed. As Dawn lay on her stomach along the platform's edge, interacting with him, Tilikum suddenly grabbed her. Some witnesses swore he pulled her by the arm. Others said it was her ponytail. Officials would later admit they couldn't say with certainty what the exact trigger was, only that the moment was swift, powerful, and irreversible. In an instant, Dawn disappeared beneath the surface. Alarms erupted. Trainers sprinted to the water's edge, shouting commands they had practiced over and over. Nets were thrown. Lines dropped. Guests were hurried out as panic spread through the stadium, but Tilikum didn't release her. He circled the pool, diving deep, surfacing, diving again, holding on with the immense strength of an animal that had no concept of the destruction unfolding above the water. The rescue attempts stretched on frantic, desperate until the unthinkable became painfully clear. Her death didn't just shock SeaWorld, it shook the entire world. SeaWorld halted all in-water interactions. She launched a sweeping investigation that exposed years of risks, close calls, ignored warnings. Former trainers stepped forward with stories that suddenly felt impossible to dismiss. Tilikum was moved away from public performances, and the debate over keeping orcas in captivity exploded into the global spotlight. But behind all the headlines was a human loss, a profound one. To her family, Dawn wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a controversy. She was a daughter, a sister, a woman who loved the ocean, who loved her work, who believed deeply in the bond between humans and animals. Her coworkers remembered her as disciplined, respectful, never careless. She understood the risks better than anyone, and she stepped into that work every day because she believed in it. The stadium where she performed still stands, but the water feels different now. Quieter, heavier, as if holding the memory of that moment. For many, Dawn Brancheau's story marks the turning point. The moment the world was forced to look past the spectacle and face the truth hidden beneath the surface. A reminder that even the strongest bond between humans and wild animals can break. And when it does, the consequences echo for years. Patricia Wyman, it was spring in the Ontario Highlands. The kind of spring that still carries winter in its breath. The air was sharp. The ground smelled of wet earth and pine, and along a winding forest road, a young woman named Patricia Wyman arrived at a place meant to feel wild and safe at the same time. The Halliburton Forest Wolf Center. Patricia was newly hired, early 20s, full of hope, excited to work with animals she'd admired all her life. The center wasn't even open to the public yet. The wolves, a captive-born pack of timber wolves, lived in a large, forested enclosure, a place that looked and felt wild, even though it had boundaries. For Patricia, it must have felt like the beginning of something meaningful. But on April 18, 1996, something went terribly, unbearably wrong. Patricia entered the enclosure with the pack. What reports say was her third day of work. No one saw the full sequence unfold. There were no cameras, no colleagues standing right beside her. Investigators later pieced together fragments. The wolves turned on her. When she was found, the scene was brutal. Unmistakably the work of a pack acting on instinct, not malice. These wolves weren't tame. Raised in captivity, yes, but not socialized like pets. Not softened by human familiarity. They lived in that Mbitwan space, not wild in the pure sense, but still ruled entirely by the old rules of their species. News of the attack spread fast through the small community. The following day, the wolves involved were destroyed. A decision that sparked anger, grief, and questions that have never fully faded. The center eventually opened, its brochures full of conservation messages. But the memory of that April morning lingered beneath the surface, like a knot in the landscape no one could quite untangle. People tried to make sense of it. Was it a feeding mistake? A misread signal? Just terrible luck? The truth is, there's no clear answer. Only a gap where understanding should be, and the uneasy knowledge that sometimes animals do what animals have always done. What remains is the human part of the story. Patricia Wyman, young and hopeful, stepping into a role she believed in. Colleagues remembering her enthusiasm, her name appearing in lists of wolf attacks, reduced to a line where a life used to be. And maybe that's the lesson Halliburton still holds in its trails, that reverence for wildness comes with risk, and that sometimes the cost is heartbreakingly high. Between what we dream of when we imagine working with predators and what those predators truly are, there's a tension that can never be fully resolved. It lingers there still, in the cold air of the highlands. A hard, quiet reminder written into the land. Jian Rangkharasamee, The morning air at Safari World Bangkok felt deceptively calm, sunlight hitting the cars just right. Tourists shifting lazily in their seats. Lions panting behind the fences like oversized house cats resting in the heat. It was September 10th, 2025. For Jian Rangkharasamee, 58 years old, decades of experience behind him, the day began the way so many others had. Routine, predictable, safe, or at least, supposed asterisk to be. Jian moved inside the drive-through lion enclosure, a place designed for predators to roam freely, while visitors stayed locked in their cars. He stepped out of his vehicle, something investigators still can't fully explain, and stood there for a moment, facing away from the lion group. And that's when everything changed. A lion, about 10 meters away, leaped without warning. No snarl, no sound, just that deadly, silent precision predators are known for. Within moments, more lions joined, 4, maybe more. Tourists began honking, shouting, waving their arms from behind windows, completely helpless as the scene unfolded in front of them. Witnesses later said it felt surreal, like watching a nightmare through glass. The attack lasted around 15 minutes, long enough that time started to stretch in the minds of those who saw it. Later, the autopsy painted the grim specifics. A broken neck, a torn windpipe, a ruptured thigh artery. Injuries that meant Jian couldn't cry out, couldn't run, couldn't defend himself. He had devoted decades to this job. Steady, experienced, careful. This wasn't a thrill-seeker's mistake. It was a routine moment, the kind that happens 1,000 times without incident, suddenly turning catastrophic. Investigators are still trying to understand how he ended up outside the vehicle at all. Were protocols ignored? Misread? Were the lions overly fresh? Too energized? Or was it something structural? Something in the system that failed him? What's clear is what happened afterward. The lion zone closed. The 5 lions involved were quarantined. Safety inspections began, and visitors who came for a simple safari found themselves trapped in their cars to the sound of roars and frantic horns, witnessing something they'll never forget. For Jian's family, the loss is even sharper. He had plans to retire, plans to care for a small piece of land, plans to live a quieter life after years of service. Those plans never came. In the end, Jian's story isn't just about danger or protocol or blame. It is a human tragedy, one that forces us to confront the fragile boundaries between humans and the predators we try to manage in captivity. It makes us ask where safety ends and where instinct begins. Jian Rangkharasamee is gone. The lions remain, and the echoes of that morning, ordinary at first, then violent, linger in the enclosures of Safari World, in the minds of the tourists who watched it unfold, and in the lives of the people who never imagined that this man's long career would end the way it did.